Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 144, is Best Tips to Use Your Stash. But before we get to that, I'd like to answer a viewer's question. I was asked what inspires me to do these videos, and it can really be anything. It can be a quilt on my long arm. It can be a question a customer comes in with. But more than anything, it's watching other videos. In fact, that's how this channel was born. As I watched videos while I walked on the treadmill, I would say, I can't believe they told somebody to do that way. There's the much better way to do that. And in fact, today's video is inspired by another video. But I'd like to give a shout out to some of the channels that I watch a lot. And that's Sister Chicks, Di from Sister Chicks, Tracy from the Sewing Channel, and April from April's Craft Room. They are the three quilt amigas, and they are having a quilt retreat coming up. I've got the dates here. It's April 29th through May 3rd, and they have a web page. It's 3 the number, not spelled out, Quilt Amigas. And I like them over watching them on the YouTube channels, and I have talked to Di in person, and I can't believe that you wouldn't have a fantastic time if you attended their retreat. So check it out. If you're available, I'm sure you'd have a great time. Okay, let's get to sewing your stash. Let's start at the beginning. What does your stash grow? How did it get there? Well, start with my favorite, purchases without a purpose. I've been saying for so long, don't buy it if you're not going to use it. If it sits on the shelf, it doesn't do you any good. But people see a fabric and they just have to have it even though they don't know what they're going to do with it. So that's in your stash. It can be yardage. It can be kits. People buy kits all the time, especially online. Same with pre-cuts. And in this episode, I'm not going to talk about kits and pre-cuts because when you're ready to use those, you can use them. You don't need me to help you figure out how to use them. There's books and books to use jelly rolls, lots of good fat quarter patterns, 10-inch square patterns. You can find those. You don't need me for that. The other things we have are leftovers from other projects, and it can be full width of fabric, and it can be tiny little scraps or anything in between. So for me, what I want to help you with today is to take your scraps and stash and put them together to make a scrap quilt. Give me a break. I'm going to swap out the boards. What kinds of things are we trying to use? What is in our scrap pile? I showed you that I was going to make this Weaver Fever because I cut the strips using the rotary cutters when I tested the rotary cutters. So I cut all the strips. I haven't started sewing them together yet, but I will. And with the required yardage from the book, this is what was left. So assuming that I don't need any of this to finish the quilt, there's not a miscut where I need to cut another piece from here, this would end up in my stash scrap pile. So these would be all nice full width of fabric pieces. And once these strip sets are made and cut, most often you don't use every single little bit of it. So you will also have things that look like this in your stash. And I actually will, when needed, take them apart, and I'll leave them together and cut them when that works for the project that I'm doing. I also have in my stash things that look like this. This is the pile of fabric that was left over after I made my turkey, my November door banner that I made. I also have things that look like this. This is clearly left over from a back. I can tell because I have the seams sewn down with water-soluble thread. Also, besides the leftovers of back, you have leftovers from borders and things like that as well. So then I will also have the things that I showed you left over from the Weaver Fever. This is a full width of fabric piece. This is a full width of fabric piece. And then you have some little bit larger hunks. I don't know what these are from, but these were in the scrap pile too, so they're a little bit bigger than a little strip full width of fabric. And then there's also all the itty bitties that are left. I can tell immediately that this is left over from a binding. This looks like leftover pieces from the project that I'm working on now at home. Another binding, other little bits that come off of things. I don't know, you may throw these away. I don't. That was a border and something, a little inner border, and other little pieces. So I start with all these pieces. Now, there's been many, many videos on how to sort your fabric. This is not a fabric sorting video. It's to say, however you sort your fabric, you need to have patterns that work with the scraps that you save and how you cut them. The video that I had watched that inspired this, well, everything she said were good ideas. Set your goals so that you can organize, for example, all your low volume fabrics, and make a list of your works in progress. All those things are good things to do, but I felt like it missed the mark a little bit on telling you how to use these scraps. And that's what I want to show you now. I'm going to get out examples of these patterns so that you can see how then I use what I have to make these quilts. I have a binder that I have made that I have all my go-to scrap quilt patterns in it, except for the ones that I've done so many times that they're in my head and I don't need the book anymore. Now, this one, the so many strips, isn't even on my list, but it's a real good one to use 1.5 by 2.5 inch pieces. But I keep these here so that when I'm ready to start a scrap quilt, I can pull what I have to make any of these quilts. So that's my first suggestion. When you have a really good scrap pattern, put it in a page protector and put it in your binder so that you've got it for the next time you want it. You don't have to hunt all over for it. Now, I have always cut, when I get down to the end of bolts or scraps, I save anything that's 1.5 inches or bigger. So I have 1.5 inch pieces full width of fabric and not full width of fabric, 2.5 inch pieces full width of fabric, not full width, and then just the whole pile of scraps. I've kind of stopped cutting the 2.5 inch strips because I found that when I want a 2-inch strip, I don't want to take that 2.5 inch strip and cut it down. I've been keeping the pieces more full width of fabric, like that orange and turquoise one I just showed you. I just leave those until I know if I want to cut them at 2, 2.5, or 1.5. I found that works better for me now. But whatever system you use, you need to put together the patterns that work for the pieces you use. Linda, who works here, loves the 5-inch square patterns. So she has boxes of 5-inch squares. I'm not a fan of those. So I don't cut 5-inch squares anymore. I still have a few left from when I did cut a few, but I don't cut them currently now unless a pattern calls for them. So let's go through the list. And these first 3 are all my patterns, and they are on my website, and we will put a link in them to a link in the description to get to them. So this is the world's greatest scrap quilt, and this is the 4-inch block, but you can also do it with a 6-inch block and an 8-inch block. The 8-inch block uses 2.5-inch strips, the 6 uses 2, and this 4-inch uses 1.5-inch. And there is a whole video I have on showing you how easy it is to cut these pieces, and I'll have a link to those. I actually looked at 4 of my older videos that all have to do with using your scraps. So we'll give you those too, because I think if you haven't seen them before, they will be helpful to help you sew your stash. This next one is my alternating square pattern, and I've done it. This is, I think I've done 3 or 4 versions of it, and this is just purple and pink, whereas I've done others with other combinations. They look different every time you make them depending on the fabric that you choose. And this uses 2-inch strips and 1.5-inch strips. So again, in the realm of the things that I have in my stash. This one is my Better Than Crumbs pattern, and this one uses 1.5 by 2.5-inch pieces plus a background. Now I try to use scrap background rather than having to add something that you have to purchase, or in my case, take from the store. And one of my videos addresses that, of how to pick a good scrap pattern. And one of the criteria is, how much extra fabric do you need? This next one is Julie Herman's Boxed In, and that's from her book, Skip the Borders. And the book is no longer available, but you can get it from Amazon, and I believe, and I'm not 100% positive, that you can get it as a download. But I love this because it's all 2.5-inch squares, and then these 2 backgrounds, my turquoise and purple, I actually found in my stash. So when you have yardage that you bought, you don't know why you bought it, sometimes they can come in really handy on a project like this. This was from Quilt Maker, and I know it was published in 2 different Quilt Maker publications. The one I have, it doesn't have the month and date on it in my binder, so I don't know when the original one was published, but this uses all 1.5-inch strips to finish to 1, and I've done this in the original size that uses 15-inch blocks. I've changed it to do 12-inch blocks, and I've even done 9-inch blocks. And this one does have one that has a background, and in this one I actually did take the gray fabric from the store, but I've learned again, if you have multiple fabrics that are pretty much the same color, you can use, for example, 4 different turquoises for the background instead of 1. So many times you can get that from your stash. So good way to use stash for both background and the main pieces. The last one I want to show you is called Dutch Breeze. And yes, I have it here. It was published in McCall's Quilting, September, October 2010. And the original pattern doesn't look at all like this because I put it on point. I also added the frames, the maroon and gray frames. So mine looks entirely different than the one that was in the pattern, but what's important is the block. And I guess I better hold that up again. So the block is a 2.5-inch strip 1.5-inch strip and 1.5-inch strip. And the beauty of this is if you use full width of fabric for your strip sets, you get 2 blocks from each strip set with almost no waste, which of course I love. And in this one, I did find the gray in my stash, but I did have to take the maroon from the store. But I still used quite a bit. It's a big quilt. I used quite a bit of stash. So I was very happy to make this quilt. So those are my real go-tos, but there really is so many more things you can do. You could do log cabins. If you have a wedge ruler, I've done several wedge quilts from leftovers of other projects. If you have a whole bunch of leftovers, I had one that was a Jason Yenter pattern that had all these odd shaped pieces, and I just took that wedge ruler and just cut, sewed them together. They all went together because they were all in the same other quilt. And I used literally almost every single little bit that was left from that quilt. And you can do the tall wedges. You can do shorter ones that you'd more call a tumbler, and anything in between. There's just so many options. But if you take some and they're your go-tos, you do them over and over again. If you use different fabric, I think it will not let you get bored. But also, when you do it many times, it's in your brain and you don't have to think as much. I love mindless sewing. And a lot of these have become mindless sewing to me because I've done them so many times. But the bottom line is these may not be the right go-to patterns for you because you may have different kinds of scraps than I have. But if you do have lots of 1.5, 2.5, 2 full width of fabric, little pieces that you can cut into 1.5 by 2.5 inch pieces, these are some good patterns to try. So I hope this helps you get through some of your stash. So now it's time to announce the winner of last week's giveaway. The winner of More Batiks is Aleta Farmer, A-L-E-T-A Farmer. Please send me your mailing address to quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com so I can get that bundle of fabric out to you. This week's giveaway, I could hardly come up with a title for it. It's just stuff that's sitting around from various sources, so we're just going to call it miscellaneous. This was a donation, but it's Halloween fabric. And this is just a picture of the pattern. The pattern is not included. We can't use Halloween fabric for Project Linus, hence I want to give it away to one of you who would want it. This one is the Cats and Dogs Stash Builder from Keepsake Quilting. If you're a cat and dog lover, this may be the packet for you. These next three are just various and sundry bundles of fabric. This is called the Blue and White Medley. They're homespuns. And these are just 3 different fabrics. This is a floral here. And then these 2 in one bag. I'm not sure why they go together or don't, but they're pretty. So hopefully you have a project that you could use them in. So in order to enter to win, you know what to do. You want to like this video, comment on the video, and subscribe to my channel. And in the comment, write miscellaneous. And it's not the easiest word to spell, but of course spell check helps us, but no points marked off for not spelling it correctly. I'm the world's worst speller. So, I want to thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please keep the comments and questions coming. And until next time, happy sewing.